It's Saturday, it's Scotland, and it's 1 p.m. And that means that we're back in original form, the legible, credible, inevitable storm, which is a force for good. Coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow. And, for those of us who are watching on Facebook, we have got a new webcam that we're just getting used to at the moment. And it's slightly better than last week. It's got higher definition. So we're hoping that this new style is going to work. If you like it, please tell us what you think. Lee is saying hi, and Tommy is saying good afternoon, and Richard is watching, and some flags there from Gordon. Gilbert saying good afternoon to you, Gilbert, and I hope everything is well and good up there where you stay. And Yule is giving us some thumbs up, and Bill's saying hi. Well, hi to all of you who are coming in on Facebook, and also everybody coming on Twitter. And if my Twitter admin can just keep me informed about how Twitter is going, please. Now, I want to get straight into a lot of stuff to cover today, a lot of stuff. And first thing, of course, is today is VJ Day, which means Victory Over Japan Day, 15th of August, 1945. Now, this was the day when the Japanese emperor indicated that Japan would surrender. And they didn't formally surrender until the 2nd of September, but today in the UK, 15th of August is considered VJ Day, and it's 75 years since that indication from the Japanese emperor. And the Red Arrows are, or at least were, going to be doing a UK-wide fly past. Now, they may, I know the times have got a little bit messed up. I think it's because of the weather, but they were going to be going over Edinburgh this morning. They were due to go over Belfast at 2 o'clock today, over Cardiff at 2:45, and over London at 5:30. And they'll be making one or two stops. I know that they're landing in Prestwick before they fly over Belfast. So you might want to keep just check out the Red Arrows Facebook or Twitter page just to see if the times are going to be changed in any way because of the weather. So that's just giving you some advance notice there of the Red Arrows doing their VJ Day UK-wide fly past, which they haven't done for about 8 years or so. So that the last one must have been then at the Queen's Jubilee in 2012. Now, what's happening here just now is I'm going to go straight into the COVID town lockdown news, which is quite good and bad this week. The good news is that finally, the England and Wales authorities have taken a new way of looking at the COVID deaths, and in fact have found that far fewer have actually died of COVID, because prior to this week, what they were doing was that they would list as a COVID death anybody who had tested positive for COVID and then died later of whatever heart attack or any other terrible affliction. They would list that as a COVID death, which of course seems a bit retarded, but what they're doing now is they're not doing that anymore. And they found that if they take away the people that they did that for, there's at least 5,377 less people died of the COVID than they had recorded. So what they're going to do now is do what Scotland has been doing, which is operating a cut-off threshold of 28 days after a positive test. after which a death is not assumed to be virus related, which seems like the intelligent thing that they should have been doing in the first place. But clearly when you dig down into these numbers, there's all sorts of ridiculous different ways that they're measuring it. The Office of National Statistics has a different way from Public Health England, has a different way from the Scottish administration, and so on. So the whole thing is really kind of farcical, and we're not going to know until several years have passed, and we've got people who can look at these matters properly, and then they may discover just how few people actually did die specifically of COVID. But that's all to come. But it will come in the future. It will be made clear, because all that which is hidden shall be made manifest, as they say. But another amazing statistic which we read this week is that in the week ending 31st of July, fewer people died in England and Wales than died in 2019, previous week, or 2018, 17, 16, or 15. So fewer people died in the week ending 31st of July than the 5 year average for that week, which is to say you'd have to go back 6 years until you found that week where more people in England and Wales died. So less people are actually dying now than ever before, and that's the 7th week in a row that has happened. So why all the panic? Why all the panic? You know, it almost seems like people are becoming resistant to rational thought. And it was Philip Johnston who summarized it in that way. People are becoming resistant to rational thought. He said the ONS figures for excess deaths published yesterday show that fewer people are dying than is usual at this time of year, and more are succumbing to flu and pneumonia than to COVID. Yet governments across the globe have managed to make this virus uniquely resistant to rational thought and decision making. How strange. How absolutely strange. How absolutely strange. But we cannot let that depress us, because we're here for the good news. We're here for the good news, but there are so many crazy edicts going around. You know, we heard another one that the so-called Welsh administration have said that they advise against playing the organ in church. Now, why would that be? It's because the organ blows out air. And that's not a joke. Like, you could have thought that would have been something like the jokes that I read out last week. But no, that's an actual Welsh administration suggestion. The Welsh administration confirmed its stance on church organs, but described it as guidance. Well, that's kind of just weird, really. And it's bad enough. It's bad enough that places of worship are being closed, because at a time of universal or national panic and upset, many people do seek solace in their religious faith. And so it seems totally wrong to be closing down places of religious worship. And you do wonder if the state can do that just now. It can do it at any time. It can do it at any time. So is the state more powerful than the church? It seems so at the moment. Certainly here in Scotland, where, according to Nicola Sturgeon, we're not allowed to sing in church. Okay, because again, that you might splutter out, and somebody 4 pews in front of you might get a little bit of COVID in the back of their hairnet or whatever. How absolutely absurd. How absolutely absurd. Just annoying, that. Absolutely annoying. And also another edict, and I say edict because these are not being made in a democratic way. These edicts are just like whatever comes into Nicola Sturgeon and her advisors' thoughts. or Boris Johnson for that matter, whatever comes into their thoughts. And here in Scotland, pubs which are reopening are not allowed to play television or music because it might mean that people will have to shout or speak louder to be heard, which might mean that the terrible COVID particles might splutter all over their friend's face. So that's an actual edict, by the way. That's an edict. You cannot play music in pubs anymore. Now, some people might think that's a good thing. Personally, I don't like music in pubs. I go into a pub, and if it's playing really loud music, I mean, I have to just get out of there because I can't concentrate on reading my newspaper or whatever. And I don't want to shout at somebody. So that's actually something I want to talk about, because prior to COVID, when things were back at normal, there was a few restaurants in the centre of Glasgow that myself and colleagues would frequent, and some of them were like bang on, beautiful decor, lovely surroundings, excellent service, good food, and yet maybe the manager had gone away or something, and the bloke behind the bar was playing the music at such a volume that you couldn't even talk to your friends. And I thought, that's just ignorant. You've just destroyed this restaurant. And too many restaurants get everything right except the background music, or at least the level of the music. And very often they don't get the music right. You walk into an old man's pub and it's like the wee person behind the bar's playing like gangster rap or something like that. You're like, no, mate, put on Tom Jones or Shirley Bassey for this pub. This isn't a gangster rap pub. And you think like that's kind of obvious, but so many people don't understand that's obvious. Anyway, what we need is a unionist restaurant. That would be fantastic. A restaurant where you go and everything is unionist, portraits of the Queen, Union Jacks. That would be fantastic. So if somebody out there that's got that idea, you've got one customer at least. Going back to that, going back to little children and masks. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but somebody pointed out to me, children are being made to wear masks because the state wants them to learn to obey from an early age. You must do this because the state tells you to, so that you raise a generation of compliant adults. And I thought, there's some truth in that. There's definitely some truth in that. Certainly some of the politicians who are promoting this really do like the idea of people complying and forcing it upon you. And it gives them a power thrill, no question about that. And so, as I say, if you've got little children, they don't need to wear masks because they're not at danger. And even if they were, their young immune systems need to learn to develop against stuff. Because I've seen children that have been mollycoddled all their life and they grow into really pale, weak teenagers who are always sneezing, always get colds, and basically have no immune system. And that's because they've sheltered all their life, or they've been sheltered from disease wearing masks or drinking filtered water or whatever. No reason for that. The body, as I always say, I used to be a natural health therapist. I know to an extent what I'm talking about. The body is made to fight disease. Generally speaking, of course, there's still some diseases that we don't fight well. But in time, the body generally will fight, certainly all these coronaviruses. Unless you've got underlying symptoms, and are also quite elderly. So don't get too upset about the COVID thing. We have to get out of this in some way, and that means by just being strong and saying, look, we're not accepting your edicts. And until the government of the United Kingdom changes direction on that, we don't really know where it's all going to end up. What is the answer? As I said last week, just accept disease is a fact of life and your body will handle it. Your body will handle it, okay? Certainly something like the COVID or the flu, generally speaking, don't be afraid. Fear is the worst thing. Fear of life. And you don't want to like have wee children being afraid of life before they've even begun. So important, so important. And, you know, I'm going to introduce an air of levity in this. There's a great journalist out there. Ronnie saying, good luck, Alistair. Greg saying, well done. Sue saying, good afternoon. Ione saying, hi. Hi, Ione. Lee saying, much better, Cam. And thanks for the badge. Aye, good. Glad you got that one, Lee. If you would like to buy one of our badges, here it is. That's our flag badge, which is a copy of this badge. This flag back here. It says a force for good through the middle. And we've also got our classic Union Heart badge, okay, which says a force for good through the middle. And they're selling well, and people are buying them for themselves, for the kids, and good wee thing, like, you know, if you're sending a birthday card to a person you know who's a unionist, buy that, stick it in the birthday card as well. They'll love it. Great wee thing, great wee badges, and you can get them from our shop. And if I ask our team to put up the link to these two badges, please. Thanks very much. George is saying hi. Roddy, picture and sound good. Watching from Bridlington, East Yorkshire. Well, do you know, I've got a story to tell you about Bridlington. I went in to collect our office mail last week, and for some reason, East Riding had sent AFFG a Bridlington tourist brochure. And I'm like, this looks fantastic. I hadn't really heard about Bridlington, but I tell you something, when this COVID thing goes away, I'm going for a weekend in Bridlington, and I'm probably going to stay in the Expanse Hotel because it looks pretty nice. I'm going to stay on the top floor there because it's like this kind of Art Deco building right down by the seaside. So Bridlington's great, and that whole area there of Britain, I've never actually been to, so I'd like to check it out. So thanks for that, Roddy. Yvonne saying, good afternoon from Unionist Hart Hill. There's a wee village in Hart Hill. How does that song go? There's a good wee song about Hart Hill. Stick that song up there, Yvonne. And it talks about how you send a letter to the Queen every Christmas, and she sends a wee message back to you. It's a lovely wee tune. Roddy says the Red Arrows were over Prestwick and sitting on the runway shortly ago. Okay, so they may still be on schedule for Belfast at 2 o'clock then. John says, hi Alistair, keep up the good fight. Frankie's sending some flags. Pauline, keep up the good fight. Get Ruth Davidson on board. Well, I don't know if she would join AFFG, but certainly best of luck to her and any unionist in Holyrood of whatever political party. Richard saying about COVID, it may well be that the Swedes got that one right. A lot of people think so. There's also a lot of people who don't want to think so, because if they admit that, they'll end up with mud on the egg on their face. Gordon saying, good work, mate. Get the country back, throw the masks in the bin, says Greg. And I totally agree with you. Totally agree. Richard saying the health and safety culture has been found wanting. Somebody saying there that the Edinburgh Evening News will be saying online that the Red Arrows flypast was cancelled. It might just simply have been because of the clouds and the weather this morning over Edinburgh, unfortunately. That's a pity. I know somebody was looking out for that and was going to video it for AFFG, but they reported a no-show to us as well. Aye, Nicola Sturgeon's canny doom mongering. This is a funny article that was put out by Douglas Murray. Now, Douglas Murray's a good Scotsman and he's also a good commentator. And he was talking about Nicola Sturgeon and about how she grimly announced the new cases that were found in Aberdeen. Now, these are not new cases of people like dying or anything like that. These are just people being tested who may well be asymptomatic, that which is to say are not showing any signs of illness and may well not even get ill. Anyway, she was announcing it like, you know, the end of the world had arrived. And he raised one or 2 points here that I'm going to read out because they will annoy the Scottish Nationalists. And part of our job here is to wind up the Scottish Nationalists. And he says, Douglas says, there is a type of Scot who enjoys nothing more in life than the opportunity to impart bad news. The words that come from their mouth may carry tales of the most appalling woe, but inside they are beaming. Who knows where it comes from, this trait, which H.L. Mencken summarized as the haunting fear that someone somewhere might be happy. Scottish joy at the opportunity to import bad news is some extension of this, the knowledge that someone somewhere may have been happy and that the universe has finally made them pay for it. And he says, this thought recurred to me as I watched Nicola Sturgeon addressing the Scottish people on Wednesday night about a fresh outbreak. And he talks just about how grim it all was and how grim it was being made to be. And that Nicola ended by saying, our job as citizens, as human beings, is to try to make sure that the fires don't start in the first place. And I can't do an impression of her, but it was something like that. Yes, our job as human beings, and as Murray says, it's good to hear a politician remind us that we are human beings. Sometimes we might forget that. Anyway, he goes on, and it's well worth reading this. I see the link is up there in the description, and he concludes. So it is that weeks after months of zero deaths, weeks of zero deaths, Sturgeon stands in front of us and warns us of fires and gloom and doom and the importance of taking action as human beings to avert a catastrophe that was in fact probably averted weeks, if not months ago. Shutting down Aberdeen for a dozen cases portrays her as a strong and determined leader. And when the financial consequences of her decision hit all these private sector bars and restaurants and shops, it will be further evidence of how much better off the Scots would be without the English yoke. The grim warnings that she issued will have given her the greatest satisfaction, not just because she is a Scot, one of those who likes being grim, but because she is a nationalist who knows that everything, including the worst possible catastrophe, can all be made to work very happily in her own favour. And that put that so well. And that's what they can do, you see. And those of us back in 1997, when the Scottish Parliament was first mooted and when we had to vote on it, we knew that's how this was going to end up. And we knew it would be 25 years or something like that before it ended up that way. But once the Nats got in control of it, they couldn't fail to win every argument because they would always have the rest of the United Kingdom and specifically England to blame. And it was just obvious political thinking. You know, you didn't have to be Maimonides or Socrates to work that one out. You just had to know that was coming because you understood the nature of the Scottish Nationalist tribe. Clearly, though, Tony Blair did not. And as for Donald Dewar, well, he just saw a main chance for, unfortunately, for the Labour Party. Well, they ended up building the gallows, which they hung themselves upon, to use that rather morbid and grim example. But that's what they did. How they will be able to get out of it, how we will all be able to get out of this, I don't know, because, well, I do know actually, but what she is going to be able to do is make every bad situation work in her favour. And that's why, for example, you see her polls rising at the moment, because she can always blame somebody else. No matter how bad things get here, she can always give the impression that it's worse elsewhere. That's why she should never have been the person who was relegated to lead this. As we said in the very early days of this, it has to be the Scottish Office and the Secretary of State who will lead it in Scotland. Because if you allow Nicola Sturgeon to lead this, she will turn it into a victory for Scots nationalism. But did they listen to us? No, they didn't. Will they listen again? Who knows? They might well listen again, because it seems that the UK government is beginning to get properly organised in Scotland. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Just after we've mentioned that Nicola Sturgeon has backed down on something. As you know, she shut down the schools, she stopped exams, and then she gave all the children, or many of them, exam results which were lower than what they expected, which may have been done throughout the United Kingdom. I'm not entirely sure, but it was certainly done here in Scotland, and she's backtracked and she's changed her mind. Well, she's got good reason to change her mind, because remember, 16-year-olds will be voting next year. Okay? 16-year-olds will be voting at the Holyrood election. And so she's not going to deprive all the 16-year-olds of their future career, is she? She's going to, I'm amazed she just didn't give them all A's, quite frankly. I'm amazed that she missed that trick. However, she obviously has to tread lightly with the 16-year-olds, because they're all going to be voting next year. And 16-year-olds aren't the only ones who will be voting at the Holyrood election. Thanks to the Scottish Elections Franchise and Representation Bill, which was passed in February and which we made mention of. In fact, we had been warning about it for 2 years. We wrote an article, which we'll put up here, back in 2018, when we pointed out that the SNP and the Scottish Cabbage Party were proposing to give everyone the vote who simply lived here. And we pointed out the dangers of that. By Scottish cabbages, of course, we mean the soggy greens. And it was really their idea, because they're internationalists. They don't believe in the idea of national citizenship. They don't believe in British citizenship. They don't believe in Scottish citizenship. They just believe in, oh, we're a citizen of the world. So they came up with this idea of give everybody the vote, not based on nationality, not based on British nationality, but based on residency. And it got passed in February. So previously, at the Scottish elections, you could only vote if you were a British citizen and if you were a European Union citizen. Now, of course, when we left, or when we leave the EU finally, it's questionable whether EU citizens would have been allowed to vote. So the Scottish Nationalists had to get in there and make sure that they could vote. And so they passed this law, which means that EU citizens will be voting as they've done in the past. But this time, refugees will be getting the vote, and basically anybody who's got what's called leave to remain here will be getting the vote. So if you're resident in Scotland, you'll be getting the vote in next year. And a lot of people don't know that, but we keep a close eye on these things. We warn against them. And unfortunately, that was brought in by a combined vote of the SNP, the Greens, and the Labour and Lib Dems, to their shame, passed that as well. And the only party that stood against that was the Scottish Conservatives. And so again, the Labour and Lib Dems digging their own grave, building their own gallows. And you could blame the SNP for this, but really who we have to blame is David Cameron, because the franchise was devolved as a consequence of the 2016 Scotland Act. The franchise was devolved. Now, if you cast your minds back to immediately after the 2014 referendum, which we won, David Cameron gave so much away to the SNP. He had something called the Smith Commission, and they all came together and they put together a huge new rack of powers that would be devolved directly into the hands of the SNP. And we warned them against that at the time. In fact, so motivated were we at A Force for Good that we published this document, which is 20 pages. It's called Dissolving, Not Devolving, a Scotland Bill Briefing Alert. And we went through the Scotland Bill and we told them all the things that would happen if they devolved all of these things. And we sent it to over 100 MPs, 200 lords, and a selection of opinion formers. And you can still get this if you go to our shop, and the link there for Dissolving, Not Devolving, a Scotland Bill Briefing Alert. And it's a unionist education in itself as well. So you can still get that if you put the link up there. And here on page 13, we said, do not devolve the control of elections and the franchise, because you will be devolving that huge power into the hands of people who will gerrymander it in whatever way they possibly can. And did we get listened? No. And there are a couple of Tories to blame for that as well. Adam Tompkins and Annabel Goldie were on the Smith Commission, and they signed off on that chaos effectively. So just to say again, AFFG was ahead of the curve. We warned everybody about the dangers of this, and it's now come to pass. And next year, there's going to be an awful lot more people on the bill. So the SNP are doing everything they can to find people who will try to outvote the Indigenous Unionist majority. And we'll just have to see how that plays out, because not all of them will vote against the Unionists, but a large proportion of them may well do. And that's not good, especially when you've got the SNP who are doing everything to pander to these groups, you see, to pander to these specific groups in order to get their vote. So we definitely need more of the UK government to come alive to the dangers, which they have not properly come alive to in the past. Seems one or two people there saying, yeah, it might be a good idea just to keep the music in the pubs completely off. I wouldn't. I would tend to agree with that, although certainly in a nightclub or whatever, that's a different matter. Gilbert says, Sturgeon says she was always following the science, but wasn't Weird Science meant to be a comedy film? Indeed. Mike says it's been a bad week for the SNP, but the SNP spin merchants turned the exams fiasco into a triumph, which showed once again that there are no checks and balances at Holyrood, and effectively 6 unelected Scottish Cabbage Party MSPs run Scotland by holding the SNP over a barrel there. Lee likes the idea of a unionist bar. Well, there's one or two unionist bars as such, but there's always room for improvement. But it's always nice to go into a bar and they've got a picture of the Queen behind the bar. It's always quite nice. I quite like that. Greg says, Unionist restaurant, you're talking my lingo now. Yes, indeed. Craig says, God bless the red, white and blue. Amen. Lee says there's a pub with Union Jack bunting around the bar in Coat Bridge. Fantastic. Do you have a a name for that one, Lee, and we'll give it a mention. Linda's worried about how long Sturgeon will keep the wearing of masks up. Probably as long as possible, knowing her. We're ending up like China. I know. So many people walk about in China with masks on. But having said that, some parts of China are very heavily polluted. Some of the cities. Linda says, good afternoon. Lee says, I want one, and the hoodies as well. We sell hoodies, Scottish and British, Welsh and British, British Ulster, English and British, British and Proud, Royal Scot, British Together. A lot of hoodies at our Teespring shop, which we'll put the link up in the description. Yeah, so this week, pleased to say, Queen Elizabeth House opened in Edinburgh. Now, this is the new UK government hub, which, as I pointed out last week, is going to be a big improvement over what they had up to now, which was a cupboard in Melville Street that the sole employee used to hide in order to avoid talking to anybody. So it should be a definite improvement upon that. And already they've done something amazing, which is several floors of the building on one side have got a big Union Jack on the windows. So it's like, the emblazoned within the glass is this half of a Union Jack, and it looks out onto the railway that comes into Waverley. So that's a really good British identifier already. Even if that building did nothing else apart from that, it's already paid for itself in terms of propaganda for the unionist cause. Brilliant idea, whoever came up with that. Brilliant idea. And it's called Queen Elizabeth House. And it's going to ensure, done properly, that the UK government is going to have much more of a presence in our capital city. And the good news is there's also going to be one in Glasgow. And I hope that it's central to Glasgow. And I hope that they do the Union Jack stunt on it as well, because it really does raises the morale of us unionists. And people go, oh, it's not all about flags. It's about philosophy as well. Yes, of course it is, but it's also very much about identity and the things which give us meaning, which are tangible things like flags. And so politics is very much about flags. You can't have politics without flags unless you're an academic or something like that. For most people, including us, flags are central to politics and to identity, and that's always going to be the case. It's always going to be the case. So we don't knock the SNP for always waving the saltire if they want. I mean, we love the saltire as well, but we also love our British Union Jack. And somebody actually sent me a message going, that's when we who love Britain see the Union Jack, we are encouraged. When those who see it and are swithering, they are strengthened towards our view. They see that we exist. They remember that that's still there. They remember it's a thing. And as for the hard separatists, well, they're discomforted by that, because it reminds them that there are people out there who disagree with them. And certainly Scottish Nationalists never really encounter those that they disagree with, because they do live in a bubble where in their minds and maybe in their immediate social circle, everybody appears to agree with them. So they presume that everybody else does. But then when they see folk like us and Union Jacks and stuff, they're like, oh no, people disagree with this. It's not perfect yet. The world's still wrong. Anyway, yeah, the UK government, good stuff. Last week we said stop the civil service being used to promote separatism. That's something that the new leader of the Scottish Tories can do. We said, if you're going to do this devolution to local councils, if you're going to advocate it, then make sure that the Scottish office which is to say the British government in Scotland is in charge of that, and you devolve directly to the councils from the British government and just bypass Holyrood, because as we said earlier, they will use whatever they can in order to confound the union, and try to simplify the funding mechanisms so people like ourselves can understand it and explain it better. And if there's branding that you could do in order to help that, then that will be really important, which brings us on to the point that this week we did read that the British government is going to start branding various spending projects with the Union Jack to show that it's coming from the British taxpayer. Because if you give it to Nicola Sturgeon, then she will pretend that she just invented it there and then this morning, that it just miraculously appeared from her Scottish Holyrood magic money printing machine. And people will just suppose that's correct because people don't know any better or how else where it might have come from. So they're just going to imagine that Sturgeon created it. If you give her the money, she's going to take it without thanks, she's going to bank it, and then she's going to pretend that she never received it. And then she is going to give it out and say, look how gracious I am to give you all this money. And she will take full credit for it. Okay? And somebody wrote an article in the Telegraph this week, Mark Wallace, and he pointed this out as well. And he goes, much of the money that she's given is spent by the Scottish administration with all the attendant branding, fanfare and invective which have come to characterise the SNP's smack-in-the-face, subtle approach to delivering their message. It might have only limited effect were Westminster to splash cash directly in the hope that Scots be grateful, but it is downright counterproductive to fund your opponents to do so. And that's so true. And the more money you can spend directly over the heads of Holyrood, the better. Now, some of it will have to go to Holyrood if they are in control of certain areas, but the more money you can spend over their heads, the better. Because remember, giving them British taxpayers' money will do nothing to help strengthen the union, because they will take it and they will brand it as their own money, and they will sell it to everybody as their own money that they created. That's what they'll do. And that's what they've done since they took over in 2007. They have misrepresented everything, and they will continue to misrepresent the source of all money that comes from the British taxpayer. So you, British government, have to find a way to stop her doing that, because so long as she's allowed to do that, she will triumph in doing that. So that's a massive thing that must be done, is you must find ways of keeping money out of her hands and spending it directly from the British taxpayer, from the British government in Scotland, into public projects. Absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. Just like in the old days when everything was done, and by the old days I mean pre-1999, everything that came up here was spent by the Scottish office, and they created a great country. They created everything, all the infrastructure that we have. And we did not need an army of MSPs to get in the way and to do it wrong, and to take that money and misrepresent it and encourage anti-British taxpayer messages. You know, it used to work so fine until it just got messed up. Oh man, messed up. It's like, here's a country that's working well. How can we mess it up? Oh, I know, let's take this separatist party and do everything we can to help them in order for them to create division in these islands. That's a very good idea. Why didn't nobody think of that? Oh man. Here's another thing that needs to be done, and it's a small thing, okay? Small thing. Now, I'm not criticizing here, and I want to make sure that the new Tory leader understands we are all wishing you the best, because we need all the voices up here we can get. We're not party political. but we do want a prominent spokesman to speak for the union, and it might be you, and if it's you, good on you, mate. If it's somebody from another party, fine. But here's something that you, as the Tory leader in Scotland, should be doing, and everybody else as well, who is not just an MSP or an MP, but an individual. And it is something which occurred to us because we read Douglas Ross's article in the Daily Telegraph. And he talks about the UK government. Good. He talks about the UK government. He calls it the UK government once, and he talks about the government, by which I got the impression he was talking about the UK government. But then he talks about the Scottish government and Nicola Sturgeon's government and our two governments. Now, it was King James VI who invented this flag, who said that you cannot have two heads on one body. Okay? Two heads on one body is not sustainable. The organism will die. It's like a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. Okay? Two heads on one body is not sustainable. And so if you are going to talk about the UK government and the Scottish government in the same breath and capitalise the letter as the word as well, G, then you are putting, whether you like it or not, even if you don't intend to, you are putting Nicola Sturgeon on the same level as the British government, okay? And you are creating in people's minds the idea that there is an equivalency and that they both have similar powers, and that for some reason the British government is putting down the Scottish government in some way and holding it and oppressing it and so on. Because if they were two governments, then why on earth is this government not independent? Okay, I'll tell you why. It's because it's not a government. It does not have the powers of a sovereign government. So it's not a government. It's an administration. An administration. And in fact, it is a devolved arm of the British government. Quite literally. It was set up by the British government to be in a vertical relationship, a hierarchical relationship, one over the other. It's a devolved arm of the British state. It is an administration, okay? The SNP is the administration. It used to be called executive, which was a good word to imply the same thing. But if you're going to call it a government, you are going to compromise your ability to argue your case. So even if technically it is called government, even if everybody else is calling it a government, doesn't mean that you have to call it that. You should talk much more about the SNP administration, not about the SNP government or Nicola Sturgeon's government or the government at Holyrood. You should talk about the administration at Holyrood, Nicola Sturgeon's administration, Nicola Sturgeon's administration, Holyrood's administration, the SNP administration. But once you start talking in terms of government, then you are giving it an equivalency. There's no question that that's what you're doing. And that is totally confusing the constitutional relationship. So please, and I mean this well, try to avoid that language, because it's very constitutionally confusing to people out there. And as I've said before, reality is created by the words that come out of politicians' mouths. You know, we've given a lot of good advice, this week to the unionists out there. And we're going to talk shortly now, in the few minutes that remain, about this week in British history, because we are aware that many people these days are trying to delegitimize our past. And this is a very easy time for them to do it. You know, we're all being consciously made to be afraid. We are being made to act out as if we're afraid by wearing masks and things like that. And so the nation is in a kind of demoralized state at the moment. And so this is an easy time for those who want to attack the past to go ahead full steam and do so. And we've seen that with like the BLM assaults, which is still ongoing, by the way. And it all comes together. It all comes together at this time when the nation is in a demoralized state. So it's important for us and for all of those who support the British nation to create a form of intellectual protection, to devise intellectual protection for our past, which is what we do every day when we recall to memory things in our British past. We recall them to memory, we make them real in the living now, and by so doing, we create a form of intellectual protection for those things. So that's why we're always banging on about our British history, because we love it and it informs the present, which creates the future. And I'm going to run through a few things today. Obviously, the 75th anniversary of VJ Day in 1945 is today. Happy birthday to Princess Anne, who is 70 today. On this day in 1771, George IV visited Scotland, and that was a big deal at the time because it had been the first time in a long time that the British monarch had made the journey up to Scotland, which of course back in those days wasn't an easy journey to make. This was 1771, and Walter Scott was essentially the spin doctor at that time, who's credited with masterminding that whole operation, which helped to knit Scotland and England together more closely. And there's a statue of George IV in George Street in Edinburgh, although the street itself is named after George III. Also, on the 16th this week, back in 1995, an interesting thing happened. You know, the Scottish Nationalists will always go, "Oh, no country voted against their own independence." And they'll say it like that, you know, say it in that accent. "No country voted against its own independence." Well, of course, like lots of things, they're completely wrong. There's lots of countries who have voted to remain part of a union or a federation or a wider political structure. And on the 16th of August 1995, the Bermudians, the people of Bermuda, voted to stay part of our United Kingdom in the sense of remaining a British territory. And indeed, Bermuda is Britain's longest, oldest British colony, you could say, or British territory. Bermuda is the oldest that's still with us, and they voted on a turnout of 60%, 74% voted to stay with Britain. Good for them. Good for them. Also on the 16th is the National Day of the sovereign base areas of Akrotiri and Dekilia, which is in fact where the Red Arrows train. Now, the National Day is one that a force for good has bestowed upon that area of Cyprus, because when we were researching national days of all the British overseas territories, we discovered that these areas of Cyprus did not have a national day. So we thought, we're going to change that, and we're going to establish the 16th of August as the National Day of these sovereign base areas. And the reason for that is because that's when the rest of Cyprus became an independent republic in 1960. And the sovereign base areas stayed with the UK. So that makes sense that 16th of August should be the National Day of celebration for the sovereign base areas of Akrotiri and Dekilia. On this day, 17th of August in last year, a force for good was in Aberdeen. Our Thin Red Line was taking on the Scot Nats. And we counted them, as we always do, and we counted 2,563 Scot Nats shuffling by. Although they lied, of course, and said that there was 12,000. And when we were doing that, we were bearing witness to the huge value of the United Kingdom. the huge value of the United Kingdom. And we're standing up for everybody who likes being British, who likes the UK, and who wants us to stay together. And we're also filming them and counting them. Bill's saying, what's your opinion of the powers? What's your opinion of Sturgeon's party political broadcasts daily? Well, yes, they will run until next election if she can get away with it, and if the BBC allow her to, which they show every intention of so doing. I'm afraid to say, Bill, absolutely, it's terrible. On the 17th of August, the father of the RAF, Glaswegian Lieutenant General Sir David Henderson, passed away. We'll be writing about him. He's been called the father of the RAF. On the 18th of this coming week, 2 years ago, we were in Dundee. Our Thin Red Line was in Dundee. We counted the Scottish National marchers. There were 3,583 of them. We've got a really good video of their march up on the web, and we'll put the link there. Easy to count them. There were 3,538 of them. Though, of course, the Nats lied and said there was 16,000. And the media believed them. The media believed them. Various other important things in history happening this week. And we will be covering all of those in our daily Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. And please give a follow to all of those if you haven't. And please also go to aforceforgood.uk/support. And just put in your name, put in your email, and we will be able to make sure that you're in touch with everything that we are doing. And this video will be put up on YouTube, and we'll also put up on our podcast page, which is aforceforgood.uk/podcast, where all the previous 20 broadcasts have been published, because this is the 20th one now, the 20th consecutive Saturday Street Stall, which is very, very good. And we're not going away. We're going to be here every Saturday. If we're not here, we'll be out on the street, or we'll be doing something every Saturday, and we'll be keeping the British end up, basically. Keeping the British end up, making sure that the pro-UK voice is being heard and giving positive ideas to those of us who are tasked with taking this forward. And so please do support us in any way. Go to our shop, buy our badges, buy our flags, our Union Jack umbrellas, and of course our wee book for the Union, which is going extremely well. And if you get your copy, stick a photograph on the internet. We'll use it. We'll send it around Twitter, or we'll share it on Facebook or whatever. But please help us get this wee cracking wee book out there. A wee book for the Union, and it's only a £5. So check it out on our shop at our website, aforceforgood.uk. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Somebody asking when is... Can see. I don't know, that's a joke there. Good. Any other comments here? The Segton bar at Coatbridge flies Union Jacks outside 24/7. Fantastic. So if you're in Coatbridge, give the Segton, Segten bar, give that a look in. Somebody saying Nicola thinks she actually paid for furlough. Yeah, well, it's the British taxpayer who's done it, or is going to be given the bill, put it that way. Julie, thanks, Julie. That's a nice thing for you to say. Duncan saying, great speech. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you. Thanks for your comments, Lee. That's good. Like it. Greg saying the War Office in Motherwell. You get a good loyalist pint in there. The War Office in Motherwell. Okay. Thanks for that. Julie's wondering about the extent to which the British government does care for us. I don't think it cared for us very much a few years ago. I think it's waking up now. I just hope it hasn't woken up too late. Somebody I called Stevens in a rage. Good stuff. Well, if we upset the Nats, that's all to the good. That's all to the good. We want to help convince the swithering, but the hardcore Nats, you know, we just, if they get upset, they get upset. So, Kirsty's saying it's nice to know Scotland doesn't want to leave the Union. Well, you know, some people don't want to be part of the Union here in Scotland. That's a fact. But the majority still does, regardless of what the opinion polls say. Because remember, opinion polls are out there as much as to lead opinion in certain directions rather than just reflect it. So when you're looking at opinion polls, say, is this one intended to lead opinion or reflect opinion? Beverly saying, keep up the fight, Scotland. We are better together. Absolutely. Love that comment. Sturgeon, Alan says Sturgeon is the First Minister, not the Prime Minister. Exactly. Exactly. If it was a proper government, she'd be called the Prime Minister, not the First Minister. She's called the First Minister because it's not a government, it's an administration. It doesn't have the sovereign powers of government. It was never intended to. The point was to be a devolved arm of the British Parliament, which is what it is. Lee's saying, well said. Beverly saying there's one government in the UK. Guy saying legally it's called an executive. That was the name which helped to differentiate it from the British government, certainly. But as soon as Alex Salmond came to power in 2007, he changed it to government. And he changed it because he could, because of the way that the devolution settlement was set up, which did not forbid him from doing so. Somebody saying you should be on the telly. Well, that will be the day. That will be the day. We've been going now for 8 years, and we've never once been approached by STV, which we call SNP TV, or by the BBC. Of course, they know we're out there, but they don't want to touch us because we're authentic unionists and we change the game. Like if we got onto Question Time, we'd be changing the game completely, and they'd be like, "Uh-oh, what have we got here? This is like all of these themes are new to Scottish politics, so we don't want to talk about them. We're just happy being stuck in this little cocoon where Nicola Sturgeon's on some kind of trajectory to take us to destroy the United Kingdom." You know, they're happy with that. Okay, so then they're not going to have us on. I'd like them to have us on, but don't hold your breath. Somebody there saying he loved, Nicholas says, loved the wee book. Glad you liked it. Glad you liked it. T-Dog wonders if the recent polls are real or fake. Who knows? Some of these polling companies have strange ways of getting their people in to comment, you know, like they pay people to vote and things like that. So I don't know if they're real or not. I take them seriously, though. You should always take them seriously, because if you don't take it seriously, you might just find it's too late one of these days. Nicholas is saying, God bless the great United Kingdom. Keep our union. Kirsty's saying, I'm in England and I've never heard this sort of thing. So there is Scottish people wanting to keep the union together. All I hear is that Scotland wants to leave. I've shared this. Should have realised I had been mistaken in the past. Yeah, absolutely. All you'll hear from the BBC is Scotland wants to leave, because that's the talking point that's controversial. The fact that there's lots of people who don't want to leave, you won't hear that. Some good comments coming in today. Glad for the engagement, folks. Linda's saying Sturgeon claiming Indy 2 will be the final one. Yeah, only if it's yes, as you say. Believe me, people say, oh, we have to have a second referendum so she loses it. and then it'll all be over. Do you think so? Say she lost it by 1%. Do you think that would be the end of it? Of course not. It would be game on for referendum 3. The only time a referendum would be good for us unionists is if she loses it by a greater margin than last time. That would be the only thing that would put this to bed as far as referendums are concerned. Alistair says, we're proud to be British. Good stuff here. We're able to comment more because of the new layout that we've got here, because of the webcam. Lee says he's been sharing pictures of the wee book on Facebook. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, that book has definitely made us want to do more. And we've got lots of ideas for wee snappy wee pocket books. And so if you're somebody out there that's got a lot of cash and you want to support us, please do get in contact, because the only thing that's really stopping us at the moment is the amount of income that we've got. We run very, very frugally and we have a small income. So, you know, we're looking for somebody out there that can really help us to take it to the next step. So if that's you, please do get in contact. Lee says, also mentioned Carson's Bar in Coatbridge. Nicholas says, good, okay, Carson's Bar in Coatbridge, check it out. Nicholas says, I really loved my wee book. Richard says, the Lovett Hotel in Perth has a Union Jack. Well, that's just worth going in there. Definitely. Hotels in Scotland should fly the Union Jack much more, because most of the tourists who come to Scotland are from the rest of the United Kingdom. So they want to see not just the Scottish stuff like a saltire, but they want to know that they're being made welcome. And so flying a Union Jack helps to make them feel welcome. You know, I don't know why. It's like what I was saying earlier, like restaurant owners who play the music too loud so you can't talk, even though the meal is delicious. It's like, what if you own a restaurant and a hotel in the Highlands, stick a Union Jack up there and all the English will flock in. Duh. Somebody else mentioned the War Office in Motherwell. That seems to be a place where lots of folk go. Good, interesting name, the War Office. Is that a Wetherspoons, I wonder? Others, Stephen. Why is Sturgeon paid more than the PM, asks Stephen. Good question. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Nicola Sturgeon. We realised this several years ago. Nicola Sturgeon gets paid more than the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. That's completely mental. Completely mental. Greg saying there's only one Prime Minister. Absolutely, and it's not in Holyrood. Okay, folks, we've run over time actually today. We weren't able to broadcast on Twitter for some reason. The Twitter device was playing up. However, we seem to have got a fairly good broadcast today on the new webcam, and we'll see how this goes. It's enabled us to have a little bit more engagement as well with the viewer, because of the way we've set it up. So we'll stick with this for the time being. We'll be back on Twitter next week, all going well. And it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom. And